Agenda. So today we're going to show you when you need to set up a campus for your local law 84 benchmarking submission. We'll describe the steps to set up and submit a campus property to the city. And finally, we will review how to avoid common campus mistakes. And then we'll have plenty of time to answer your questions. The Department of Buildings Sustainability team is with us today, and they will be responding to your questions both during and following the presentation. And the slides and the links, everything we talk about today will be shared with you in an email going out early this afternoon. Quick reminder for everyone. Here's the timeline, current timeline for local laws 84, 88, and 97. The initial deadline was May 1st and had a grace period that ended on June 30th. If you missed the June 30th deadline, you can submit a local law 97 extension request by August 29th, and that extension will allow you to submit your benchmarking report by August 29th and your local law 88 and 97 reports by December 31st. All right, campuses. So what is a campus? Well, it's simply two or more buildings on a single tax lot or multiple buildings on separate tax lots that share one or more energy sources, such as gas or electricity. And here's where you start in earnest each year. So if you use Portfolio Manager to set up individual buildings, this should look pretty familiar to you on each of the steps that we do. And the first step each year is to check the covered buildings list. And the current version is on the Department of Buildings website at nyc.gov/NYC benchmarking. The links to the covered buildings list are just above the individual benchmarking steps. City publishes an updated local law 84 covered buildings list by March 1st of each year. And that covered buildings list is a list of properties that building owners are required to report energy and water benchmarking data to the city on an annual basis. So you can see here, there's two versions of the list. We recommend using the PDF version of the list because that will open up in your browser. A few pointers about the list. Searching for your building, you would use your property's borough, block, and lot number. It's also known as a BBL. So use the borough, block, and lot number. To search, you select Control F as in Frank on your keyboard. For your Mac users, that's Command F, and enter your 10-digit borough, block, and lot number, or BBL. If you don't know your BBL, use BizWeb, that's the Building Information System website, or ZOLA, that's New York City's zoning and land use map, to look up your property. So we'll include links to both of those platforms later on today. If your property's on the list, you must report your benchmarking data to the city. If you have more than one BBL associated with your campus, search the covered buildings list to confirm that the additional BBLs are listed. When you find your property on the list, look at the second column, and that will have a Y or an N. Y means yes, and that means you need to report water data. If you've done this in the past for any property or any individual properties you're adding to your campus, then the water data is already there. If not, there are several steps that you can go through to set that up. If you need help, contact us and we'll help you through the process. Now, if you move across to the middle of the page, that's I think the 8th column, it says building count. That's the number of buildings that the city believes are on your property. So buildings are also called bins. That's a building information number. So if you have 3 buildings, you will have 3 bins for your property. Your next step is to check the local law 97 covered buildings list. And you use the same steps that you did for the local law 84 list. You enter your 10-digit BBL, select Control F, search for your property, and you'll see something that looks like what we have on the slide here. One important note, the BBL and the building identification number, or BIN, entered into Portfolio Manager, that must match the BBL that's on the local law 97 covered buildings list. If you see a difference between the local law 84 list and the 97 list, go with the local law 97 version. And of course, we'll have links for these two items later today. Just to reiterate what I'm just saying, if you have 3 buildings on your lot, you'll have 3 bins. So right here shows the 3 buildings. Later on in the process, you would make sure that you have 3 bins to report. So if you have multiple buildings on a single BBL, New York City Map is a really good tool to help you identify the bin that corresponds to each building on your property. And to use City Map, you just select building from the sidebar on the right side, just check that one off, and then enter the address or the BBL for your property. It will zoom into your property and will show you an outline of all of the buildings that you have. And to see the bins, just click on each building and you'll get a little pop-up like we see here. And the second row will have the bin number for that property. Now you want to know, I have my bin number, what street address does that correspond to? To do that, you want to go into BizWeb and go through the same process to look up your property. When you do that, you'll see a list of all of the bins associated with your property and the corresponding addresses. So once you have the bins, the addresses, and the locations of each building, I think you're all set knowing where to put each item in Portfolio Manager. Okay, next, let's look at the types of properties that must be submitted as a campus. First example on the left, we have 2 or more buildings. They're both on the same BBL. They are submitted as a campus. In the middle, we have 2 or more buildings and 2 or more BBLs, but they share energy. They also have to be submitted as a campus. On the right, we have 2 standalone buildings, same owner, different BBLs though, and they're not sharing energy. Those are not shared as a campus. So you submit those individually. You don't go through the campus process. All right, so setting up a campus property is similar to benchmarking a single building. There's just additional steps, and then you need to link them all up. So all building characteristics and energy data is entered into Portfolio Manager, but you need to go through the steps to connect them all so that you create your campus setup. And to help you with the process, Energy Star has a 7-page guide for benchmarking campus properties. So this guide is really useful to understand campus-related terminology, such as parent and child, and so on, and other features for campuses. Also provides an overview of how to set up your campus, and we'll include a link to that later on. Portfolio Manager utilizes a parent-child relationship to group multiple properties together. When setting up a campus, your property will have 1 parent property and 2 or more child properties. The parent is a virtual building that includes the details for all of the physical buildings on a property. They include the combined gross floor area, the building count, property use details, and all of the buildings in the property. Everything's rolled up and totaled up for the parent. It also includes all of the BBLs and bins associated with the campus. The child properties, those are physical buildings, and you create a child property for each building that you have on your BBL, and those properties would include the 1 BBL, the 1 bin, the gross floor area, and other details that correspond to that individual building. It's important to create the correct number of properties. So you want to have one child property for each bin. Again, that's a building identification number. So one child property for each bin or each building that's on the BBL. So for instance, if you have 2 buildings on your property, your portfolio manager campus must have 1 parent and 2 child property profiles for a total of 3. All right, let's look at an example. So here we have 2 buildings on the BBL that ends with 0128, and at least one of the buildings is over 25,000 square feet. The BBL ending with 0127 is not on the CBL, but building C shares energy with building B. And in this scenario, the child property must be created for building C and D because C and D are on the same lot. So this campus will include 4 child properties, 1 parent, and I'll have 2 BBLs and 4 bins. Okay, now we're going to go through a few steps to get you started with Portfolio Manager. Of course, the first thing you do is you log into your Portfolio Manager account using the login and password you hopefully have handy from last year. If you don't have that information, look for an email from energystar.gov. It's probably the first email they sent to you when you started this process 1 or more years ago. And when you log into Portfolio Manager, to start the process to create your parent property, you select Add a Property on the upper left-hand side of the landing page. And that brings you to a series of steps. And again, it's create your parent property first. Very important. So select the property type that best describes the campus as a whole, or the property type that represents the largest use on your campus. You may have multiple uses. The one that's has the largest use, that's the one to go with. And then you add the total number of your property's buildings. Now, this is the total number of physical buildings that are part of the campus. So your total building count should not include the parent property. And for instance, the total number of bins, building identification numbers, or buildings on the BBL should in most cases match the building. So bins and buildings should match. Then you add the basic information for the parent property in the About Your Property window. So you add any name that helps you to identify the campus. We recommend adding the complete address and maybe putting parent after that to help you identify it later. When you add the gross floor area, remember that this is the combined square footage of all of the buildings on the campus. And then you complete the remaining fields, continue to the next section, which is where you enter your standard IDs. Standard IDs are your 10-digit borrow, block, and lot number, and your 7-digit building identification number, or BIN, the ones that are associated with the campus. And I just lost the share.
Let's reshare.
Yeah. I think I was knocked out as the host. Okay. All right. Minor blip. Okay, so standard IDs. It's your 10-digit BBL and your 7-digit BIN associated with your campus. And what you do first is you look for, at the top, you're going to see a window that says City, Town. It's a drop-down window. Click in there. Be lots of choices. The one you're looking for is NYC Borough, Block, and Lot. Once you select that, to the right, there's another window where you put the ID number, and that's your 10-digit borough, block, and lot number. If you have more than one BBL associated with your campus, separate each BBL with a semicolon, but no spaces. Then you want to move down towards the bottom and go through this process again. Here you want to add it to standard ID other, that drop down window, and you're going to search for NYC building identification number. Once you select that item, you add each of your bins separated by a semicolon and no spaces. So if you have 2 buildings, you add 2 bins. If you have 10 buildings, you add 10 bins. Once you've entered all of your IDs, you select continue, and pardon me. And then Portfolio Manager is going to ask you for the property details for your campus. Now, since this is the parent property, you're accounting for the details for all of the buildings on the campus. For example, if you have 2 multifamily buildings with 40 apartments each, you would enter 80 apartments for the parent property. Same rule applies for gross floor area. You add up the gross floor area of all of the child properties and enter the total as the gross floor area for the parent property. One note about the user default, you see that in the middle. It's where you can check off user default. In New York City, you can't do that. You must select the actual data for each item. So the gross floor area, number of residential units, and so on. You're not allowed to use user default for the parent or the child properties. Once you complete all of the steps, you've successfully created your parent profile, and you will see a green banner at the top and your property information below. That's your parent property that you've just set up. And once you have your parent property set up, you can now start with the child properties. So on that same page, just scroll down a bit and you'll see on the bottom right, individual buildings on this property, and you would select add a building. It's 2 ways to add child properties. If you already have a property profile set up in Portfolio Manager and you need to bring that property into this campus as an existing building, there are steps to do that. So you would select that option. We're going to focus on setting up a new building, so that's more common. So to do that, to enter a new building, you repeat the steps we just went over for setting up the parent property by filling in all of the required fields. And when entering the building details, make sure you add only the gross floor area, the BBL, the bin, and other details that are specific to the child property that you're adding at that time. Once you have your first child property set up, you repeat the process for each child property on your campus until you have them all in there. And once you have them all in there and you're all finished, you can view them as a list in the summary tab of the parent property. So you go to summary, scroll down, you'll see where it says individual buildings on this property, and it will list them there. You can also click through to each child property. So if you see the addresses here that are highlighted, those are links. So 77 West 85th Street, if you click on that address, it will bring you to that child property profile. So it's very handy. And you can also view as a diagram all of your properties, and that will allow you to see all the properties as a diagram. So this one's a small campus, only 2 buildings. If you have a large campus, you won't see all of the buildings, but you can use the slider on the left to make them smaller to bring them all in on the same page. All right, so we just completed the steps to create a parent and child property in Portfolio Manager. Now we're going to talk a little bit about reporting a campus with multiple use types. Here's our example. So let's say you have 2 mid-sized buildings on the same BBL. Both buildings have more than one use type. So the building on the left, we have apartments with ground floor retail, and the building on the right also has apartments, but at the bottom floor, they have a supermarket. So to set up your buildings in Portfolio Manager for these and any other building that you would set up, you would select one of the 60 Portfolio Manager use types that are accepted by the Department of Buildings. And if you're wondering what the 60 are, we'll include a list this afternoon in our email. When you set up your campus, you have two important rules to remember. The first one is child properties represent the physical buildings, so they should only have the property use details respective to them. Second, the parent property is a virtual property, and that represents the aggregate of all the child properties on the campus. And this means that the parent property should report all of the use types and the combined gross floor area of all of the child properties. So here's what they look like. If you look at the property use and use details section, that's under details. You can see a breakdown for the campus that we were just looking at, those two sample buildings. Whoops, there we go. So child 1 on the left, you have the multifamily housing, and then it's followed by child 2 multifamily housing, that's the building on the right. And then it repeats the retail store and the grocery store, but they each have their own separate property use type here. The total gross floor area for all of the use types, they should match the gross floor area entered into the basic information window. That's on the left side here. You'll see that it says 61,403 square feet. If those numbers don't match, so the number on the left, that's something that you entered earlier when you set up your parent, they need to match what you have on the bottom right here, which is the total for the child property uses. In this case, it does match. They both have 61,403 feet. If they don't match, reconfirm your totals. Just make sure they're right for the child properties. If they're not, correct them and so that they match the parent. If the parent is incorrect, you can just select edit and make that simple change there. The use type selected for the parent property is shown in the property type window under the details tab. You can see this on the right here. So here we have the multifamily housing as the use type selected by the user. And it's also selected by Portfolio Manager. They will calculate a use type for your property, but occasionally they'll calculate a different use type for your campus. So if you see a difference there, we recommend changing the self-selected use type, the one you entered, into Portfolio Manager to match the Portfolio Manager calculated use type. And it's a simple change just by clicking on the edit button here. If you have a problem, they're thinking maybe it's not quite what it should be, contact us and we'll figure it out with you. Okay, with that, I am going to hand everything over to Lilibeth, who's going to continue with the slides.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. So up to this point, we've talked about how to set up your parent and child properties in Portfolio Manager, as well as how to report your property use details across multiple buildings. So now we're going to touch a little bit on requesting and reporting data consumption across multiple buildings. So when requesting your energy and water data from these utilities, you can request the data at the child level and then aggregate it up to the parent. Be aware that Con Edison and DEP will provide consumption data at the BBL level, whereas National Grid will provide the data at the service address level. So since National Grid is a little different, we're going to spend a few minutes on them. So because National Grid uploads per service address, in order to obtain whole building data, you will need to create a child property per service address. And also note that this is only for National Grid service territories. So that covers Brooklyn, Staten Island, and parts of Queens. And as a reminder, we always want to associate our meters from the child properties up to the parent. And so to help us visualize, we have an example of a type of building that we would expect to have multiple National Grid service addresses, thus requiring a child property for each. So we're going to take a look at what something like this would look like in Portfolio Manager. So here we have an example of what a property with multiple service addresses could look like in Portfolio Manager. In this example, we have 4 service addresses. On the right-hand side, we can see the meter view for this campus configuration. We have 4 child properties with their respective meters, and a parent at the top with all of the meters from all of the child properties listed. The left-hand side is just showing us the 4 National Grid natural gas meters aggregated at the parent. So this table is showing the meters all aggregated to the parent profile. There are also some cases where you have a single standalone building that may have more than one National Grid service address. So in a case like this, although you have one standalone building, you would need to create a child property so that you can obtain the gas usage for your additional service address. So here's a visual as to another kind of configuration that what it would look like in Portfolio Manager. So once again, on the right-hand side, you can see we have the parent property, which is the main property profile, and a child that is solely created to receive the National Grid data. It's solely for that extra service address. And having this parent-child relationship allows the user to aggregate the usage from that child up to the parent, making a complete report. So they have whole national natural gas data. So because when it comes to now sharing between multiple buildings, when it comes to the utilities like Con Ed and DEP that upload aggregate at the BBL level, shared data can be requested and uploaded to one of the child properties for the entire BBL. So this may result in one child having an abnormal amount of energy, while another child has maybe no data at all. That's okay. In that case, put a note in the property notes explaining the meter setup, and that you'll find in the details tab in Portfolio Manager. And ultimately, again, you're always going to be putting all the meters up to the parent anyway, so it works out. Okay, so here we're going to take a look at a hypothetical example of a fairly common type of campus. We have a house of worship with an administrative office building and a school. To set up our campus in Portfolio Manager, we would create 3 child properties, one for each physical building, and then 1 parent property to represent the entire campus. We're going to dive a little deeper in looking at the meter configurations. So looking at the diagram, we can see some meters are shared between the buildings and others are exclusive. If we look at the house of worship, we can see it's sharing natural gas heating with the school and then electric and water with the office. The school has its own electric and water system, while the office is heated separately via fuel oil. The unshared exclusive meters that we're showing here in blue should live in their respective child property profiles. When it comes to the shared meters or usage, those should be added to one of the child properties. So for example, the house of worship is sharing a heating system with the school. Where should we report the natural gas usage? We'd recommend reporting it at the child where the physical meter or equipment lives in real life. So if the heating system is located at the school, you can report the usage for both the house of worship and the school in the school's property profile. So this shared meter will be listed under the school, but it represents the shared usage for both buildings. And it's always really helpful to include notes in the property notes for the child properties explaining these meter configurations. But ultimately, after you've requested your data and reported it in the child properties, both your energy and your water usage, you're always going to associate them up to the parent. And when it comes to setting up meters, it's really, really important to have the correct meter associations and meter tracking settings. The parent and all the child properties must be set to tracking total energy consumption, the way it appears here on the right side. Sometimes folks think it's partial when there's shared situations. It's always total, total at the child's and total for the parent. So to give you a visualization, here's an example of a child property that's part of a campus. We're looking at the energy tab, and we're going to bring your attention to where the red curly brackets are. It should say this is a single building because this is a real building, and you are tracking total energy consumption for your building. If this is not what it looks like, you'd want to hit edit and make the adjustment. And you want to check this in your energy, but you also want to do the same thing in the water tab. So everything we're going to talk about now for energy, you would also check for water if you have to report water. So if you need to update your tracking settings, you'd hit edit next to the you are tracking, and it'll pull up a page like this. We're showing it here for both child properties in this example campus. We have the first child has 5 exclusive unshared meters, and we're saying they're all checked, they're all selected, and we're accounting for total energy consumption. And the second child, we have 1 shared meter. There's a fuel oil that's shared between the 2 buildings, so that's why there's a campus setup for these 2 buildings. And then it has 5 exclusive active energy meters that are pertain just to that building. And this also says accounting for total energy. So child 1 has 5 meters, child 2 has 6, including the 1 shared between the 2. And we've been saying throughout the presentation, you have to aggregate your meters up from the child to the parents or associate them up. But like, what does that mean? How do you do that? To associate or move up your meters from the child to the parent, you have to go to the parent property profile. So here we're showing the parent, and you'd go to the energy tab, and you're going to look for this blue link that says change meter selections, where the red arrow is pointing to in the middle. When you click on that, it's going to open a page like this, select meters to include in metrics, and you're going to want to check off every single active meter. And when you're doing this is what associates or aggregates the meter up to the parent. You can also see in the meter location column where each meter belongs, what child do they belong to. And if you guys recall, the first child, we looked at the 2 child properties. One had 5 meters, the second one had 6, which means that the parent, we should have a total of 11. So that's what we see here. We have a total of 11 meters because we checked off all of the child property meters, and we have these meters account for total energy consumption selected. Okay, so this is what we mean when we say aggregate your meters, your child meters up to the parent. And so then this is what the parent property will look like when you finish. And you'll see it says meters used to compute metrics. There's 11. So we're including all of our child meters. And then if we look at the tracking where the curly brackets are, for the parent, it's going to say that your property is a campus of multiple buildings, and it should say you are tracking total energy consumption for your property. And you'd want to check the same thing for water if you have to report water. So at this point, we've gone through setting up your campus, putting in your details, getting your energy, making sure everything looks good. So then you're ready to go through the submission process. Important to note that starting in 2025, the submission process did change. So instead of using the reporting template like in previous years, we are now submitting our properties to the city via a direct property share in Portfolio Manager. So we're just going to touch on the most important notes to keep in mind when it comes to successfully sharing your property with the city. So the first thing you're going to have to do is get connected with the city. You're going to have to add them as a contact. So you'd look for the contacts page and click on that add new contact / connections button. And that's going to take you to another page where you can search for their username. It's right here on the screen, NYC GOVLL84. You're going to enter that in the username field, search, and wait for the profile to come up so you can send a connection request. When you send your connection, it should be accepted within 24 hours, and you'd get notified via email as well as in Portfolio Manager. You'll have a notification once the connection is accepted. Once you get that notification, then you can go ahead and share your property with the city. And the most important thing to note is that when you are selecting your properties, or when you click select properties, that you select the parent and all of the child properties. It's very important to submit the entire campus together. Sometimes folks think that just submitting the parents is enough, or they'll do the children separately. It has to be all together in one submission. Okay, so that's the most important thing to take away from here. And take note that when you make your selections, it will show you where it's circled here, selected properties. It will show you how many you selected, so you can make sure that you selected the correct number. So once you share your property, you've submitted it to the city, you'll receive a confirmation email from the city. It's going to come from their beam_LL97@buildings.nyc.gov account. This is your proof of submission. It's going to go to the property data administrator in Portfolio Manager, and it's also going to go to the owner's rep, and service provider that is entered in DOB now. So this is your confirmation email that you would be looking for once you submit the building. Okay. And so we are approaching the end of the presentation, so we're just gonna wrap up with touching on some common mistakes, most of which that we talked throughout the presentation today, but just to recap for all of us here. First, submitting your campus as a standalone building. If you have multiple buildings on a lot, or you have buildings that are sharing, it needs to be submitted as a campus. You can't send those as a standalone building. So if you meet the eligibility or the criteria for a campus, you need to submit it as a campus. 2, submitting the parent without the child, or vice versa. You can't just do the parent just because all the energy is in there. You have to do everything together, parent and all the child properties together at the same time. The tracking, number 3, tracking partial instead of total. It has to be total tracking consumption at the children and at the parents. Number 4, not adding all the active meters from the child's to the parent or the details. Remember, you always got to move up. Everything from the child properties has to be represented at the parent. Number 5, treating the parent like a real property rather than a virtual property. Remember, the parent is not a real building. It's just a compository for all of the details from the child properties. So it's just a representation. It's not a real building. The child properties, though, are real buildings. Number 6, not accounting for the gross floor area, the bins, the BBLs of all the children in the parents. That's also very important. The gross floor area from the child properties should add up and be represented at the parent. Make sure you put in all the bins and BBLs from the children needs to also be listed at the parent. 7 and 8 tie together. Make sure that you use one of the 60 eligible used types, property types, that are listed in the rules, and that whatever you put in the child properties, again, you want to represent it also in the parent. And lastly, in some cases, some folks may need to submit buildings that are on non-covered BBLs. If you're in a situation like that, please reach out to Beam so that they can assist you with that kind of campus setup. And so with that, that brings the end of our webinar for today. So thank you all for your time, and we'll be happy to take some questions and go over some questions in the chat. Thank you.